Good evening, everyone. This is TakeBack.org. I'm Sheila, and tonight we have a very special program about one of the events that I'm most proud to be involved in. It's the Power of Purple, the campaign against domestic violence, and this year we're doing something very, very special. You know, with everything that's been happening with women's voices being raised and being heard for the first time, many of them, against domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment, one of the most important ingredients in creating the cultural change that we need is to get our men involved and keep them involved and have their consciousness raised as well. And how better to do that than to honor all of the men in our community of Eastern Connecticut who work to fight against domestic violence. So we have the perfect guest today to talk about how we're going to do that honoring. And I'm going to introduce Patrick Sheehan-Gaumer. Good evening.
Good afternoon, Sheila. How are you doing?
Okay, and what is your title at Safe Futures, which is the agency that helps domestic violence issues?
Yes, Men's Engagement and Violence Prevention Educator is my official title. And I've been at the agency for about 3.5 years now.
Okay.
And yeah, my job is to try to expand the work we do with men, as well as largely work with youth in our schools, and then also provide some counseling.
Okay. It's always important to understand that when we talk about domestic violence, although the preponderance of victims are women, there are men who are affected by domestic violence who are victims as well in our community. And there are male children that are affected. Many children are affected by violence in the homes. And we have to remember that it takes the whole family to be healed, and it takes men and women joining together to solve the problem. And so we have to stop thinking in terms of, let's talk about domestic violence only as it relates to the women victims, right?
Of course, we've described domestic violence as a women's issue for decades because it's happening to women. I really love that you acknowledge male victims. But we also need to acknowledge that even with male victims, the majority of the people doing it are men. And so the solution has to be looking at the people who are being violent. And it's connected, right? It's the connected. The attitudes towards relationships, towards gender roles, can lead to both violence by men and to men not speaking up when they experience violence. It's not considered very manly to admit that your partner is hurting you and that you don't know what to do. I provide counseling for men as young as middle school every week and as old as into their 70s.
Right.
And every single one of them, I can tell you, has had that issue of feeling like it's unmanly to admit their victimhood.
And that's not just a personal issue arising out of someone's DNA. That's cultural, right? That goes back generations, and I've myself given talks and lectures about the history of gender discrimination and how we have come to be a culture that prizes male dominance over women, and how over the centuries things are changing, but it wasn't that long ago when it was okay to abuse your spouse, when it was considered not just normal, but the proper thing to do to chastise a woman's spouse. It was okay to even kill your spouse if they insulted the family. It was okay to take control over a woman's body, her children, her property. All of those things took centuries to overcome. We just got the vote in 1920.
Not even 100 years ago.
And it wasn't until the 70s when a court in one of our states said, you know, a man cannot sexually assault or rape his wife. It's a crime. Up until then, it wasn't a crime. So we've come some way, but we have a long, long way to go. And the fact that domestic violence is such a huge part of our culture, affecting 1 out of 3 or 4 women, causing 3 murders a day in this country, right? causing millions of our kids to watch parents, moms and boyfriends have violence in front of them, or themselves being subject to violence and traumatizing their lives. This calls for an enormous cultural transformation.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. And the first step of that is to acknowledge it's a problem, right? And so I love that you bring that how common it is, 1 in 3 or 4 women. The statistics are that 1 in 3 teenagers will experience dating violence. And that includes both men and women. Roughly 60% identify as female and 40% as male. But when it comes to the larger life, 1 in 4 women experience sexual violence in their life. 1 in 4. 1 in 6 men experience sexual violence. Most of that before the age of 18. So it's violence we're doing to boys. And that message that cultural and political and legal history of men having more power than women, but also that message that men get their power through that violence, I think is still present today in the messages of where our power comes from. It's also men's violence against other men that is happening. That idea that your power comes from violence is prevalent even in our children's toys, right? Look what we give to boys and girls for presents. The message is subtle there. I'm not saying that action figures directly encourage domestic violence, but what's the percentage of toys in our boys' hands where their power comes from violence? There's a problem. I'm going to solve that problem with my big muscles or my big guns. I'm going to use power over somebody else to solve this problem. We get that message every day for years and years and years, and then we get into a relationship and we don't know how to solve our problems through listening or through nurturing or through caring because we haven't been taught it.
Right.
And so part of our work at Safe Futures is to go into schools. I was hired originally in the prevention program to go into schools and to try to model it. What is model for a classroom, me listening to my female co-teacher, because a lot of boys haven't seen that, haven't seen men taking leadership from women.
Yeah, but when we talk about the gender inequality, people sometimes talk back and say, look, men are like this, that's how they're born, it's their DNA, and women are like that. And I say, no, a lot of behaviors are learned. A woman isn't automatically the only nurturing one. A male can be nurturing also. There are human qualities that transcend the divisions between the sexes. And so many of our young boys and young men are hurt by the demands of the culture for them to be manly and, yes, sometimes violent, and not to show emotions, not to show their feelings, right? Those things are learned. So I don't buy that men are the tough guys and women are the soft ones. Let's talk more about that.
Yeah, it is very much learned. And the statement boys will be boys is just lazy. Anybody who leans on that is not doing the emotional work, right? It takes, because that aspect of boys being tough. I've got a 5-year-old son, and I can tell you he cries just as much as my 11-year-old did when she was 5, my 11-year-old daughter. They're not born like this. We're not born that different. We have to teach it along the way.
But maybe not you as a parent, but another parent of your son might say to him, don't cry, boys are not supposed to cry. So whatever the natural human instinct is to cry, boys are taught, no, girls cry, you don't cry. You don't show, you be tough. You don't show your vulnerability, your soft spot. Not allowed.
Not allowed, right? And with the girls, we say, oh yeah, you can be vulnerable, but we don't model toughness as much, right? And so we should be teaching our girls to be tough, right? It's their strength through that toughness, and we also need to be teaching our boys to be more vulnerable. We learn it from different places. It's parenting, but it's also schools, it's TV shows, it's everywhere else we pick it up. Because we talk about women being the emotional ones, but name one emotion a woman has that a man doesn't.
Exactly.
We have the exact same emotions, but we're encouraged to squash it. We can express anger, and we can express kind of happy, cool. And that's publicly the kind of 2 things we can really show. I think we can show more, but the feedback we get from those around us. And I ask this in schools. I ask it in our high school programs, our middle school programs. How do you respond when a female classmate cries? And sure, it can still be awkward, but generally it's support, asking her if she needs help, asking her what her needs are. And I say, great, what happens when a boy cries? Oh, you leave him alone. You let him deal with it because he's going to be embarrassed. And that way that it's being taught are your emotions, if you express any emotion that isn't anger or toughness or being okay, that you should be embarrassed, that you definitely are alone. Male suicide is way higher than female suicide. And that doesn't mean that girls' self-harm isn't important, but men who are between the ages of 10 and 14 have 3 times the suicide rate. For every 1 girl, 3 boys kill themselves.
Wow.
15 to 19, for every 1 girl who kills herself, 5 boys kill themselves.
Wow.
And between 20 and 24, for every 1 girl who kills herself, 7 men kill themselves.
And look at all the young men who are perpetrating the mass shootings.
You know, some of them have histories of self-harm, but most of them, over half of these men who have done mass shootings, have histories of domestic violence or sexual violence. Mm-hmm. We see the connection at Safe Futures. We see that personal violence, hurting the people who you're supposed to love, equals this violence to larger communities. Right. And it equals it because it's coming from the same place. The gender roles that you're talking about, the messages of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, encourage it. We don't see women doing these mass shootings. How come? They live around the same laws, around the same culture. I don't believe it's because men are born to hold guns and shoot them. Right? Guns are not natural. You can't say that's a natural instinct.
But in this country, as we're seeing from the gun violence and from the debate on gun control, which is a very tough thing to do in this country, to put any controls on the ownership of guns in this country, it's this culture of violence that's the history of the United States. The Second Amendment plays such an important role in this masculinity and in this violence. Mm-hmm. And the notion that the Supreme Court in our modern day would decide that what they said back in the 1700s about muskets and a well-regulated militia applied to you being able to own in your home an AR-15 is just unbelievable. But people around the world can't fathom that. We are so attached to that Second Amendment. And what we did in this country in moving across the country, Manifest Destiny, going from the East Coast to the West Coast, turning away every culture, every Indian civilization, destroying that, taking over parts of Mexico and going all the way to the Pacific, conquest, violence, that's our ethos. That in some ways, despite the magnificent things that America has created as a free society, this is really one blight, this culture of violence. And you see it in our movie culture, when you see Clint Eastwood, who's a wonderful movie maker, when you see the Make My Day, to me that represents everything that you're talking about. Make my day, what does that mean? If you don't do what I say, I'm going to perpetrate violence against you. Exactly.
Domination, violence equals problem solving. We have a problem, we use dominance to have power over somebody else, and it solves the problem. And that doesn't equal happy lives. Right? I don't think that hurting somebody else makes your life better, but this model that we're talking about, that's the map we're given. We're being told, men in this country, and I'm glad you're bringing in the history of kind of dominance through culture as well, right? I mean, what it means to be a white man in this country. Like, I can read history, for me, is reading about the success of white power over other cultures and over other lands. And I need to examine what that means if I'm going to be a better dad to my son. Because that line that your power comes from violence is almost never explicit, right? That's not the sentence that comes out. the sentence that comes out is to make my day. And somebody who looks like, wow, like no one's going to mess with him. I don't want anybody to mess with me. I want to be like him. When in reality, the solution for people to be protected and safe is through nurturing. It's through acknowledging and listening to everybody. That's the real model. I would love to see a movie where we see men listening to other people to solve a problem, to caring, not just about this one aggrieved person, but caring about everybody. Bad guys don't just go away, right? The bad people don't just go away, right? We have to change. We all live in the same place, and we all need to get better at the same time.
But it's hard to change when it's cultural and one generation carries the traditions down, and the whole kid grows up seeing the way dad treated mom and treated daughters, and that kid is likely to model a lot of that behavior. But you in your work at Safe Futures are trying to do something about it by teaching boys about healthy relationships, and maybe that cycle can be broken.
That's the goal. That's the goal. And if I could take a minute kind of to describe everything Safe Futures does, just so the viewers can hear it. So we really have 3 goals at Safe Futures, right? The way we describe it is the first step is saving lives, because we can talk about gender theory and all this kind of these ideas, but the reality is that there are people being hurt every day in our communities, and they need a safe place to go to. So we have a 24-hour hotline that people can call any time of the day to get help if they are being hurt by their partner. And when I say being hurt, it doesn't just have to be with fists or with physical violence. Emotional violence hurts too. Being told that you're not good enough, being told that you're fat or ugly or lazy or any kind of those insulting categories we put people under, that can hurt just as much. We're here to be believed, or we're here to believe you. I'm sorry. That's the first barrier to people reaching out for help. 85 to 90% of people who experience domestic violence and sexual assault never tell anybody. They don't reach out for help from agencies like us or the police to get protection. They keep it themselves because they don't know they're going to be believed. So we do the hotline. We have a 24-hour shelter where we house people. We will go to the courthouse for folks to help get restraining orders. We work with the Norwich Police Department to help respond more immediately to domestic violence. And we also have what we call the LAP program, which is lethality assessment. It's to help the police identify who is most at risk of dying. Nationally, we can give statistics, but in Connecticut, it's about 1 person a month is killed in domestic violence. And that is a very consistent statistic over the last few years, that 1 person a month in our state is killed by their partner. Their lives need to be saved. And so we do the work to try to save their lives every day. The next thing we do is restore hope. We know what it's like to experience violence in our relationships. And you feel hopeless and you feel down. And oftentimes you don't see where the hope could come from. So we want to help restore that hope with our counseling department. We have offices in both Norwich and New London where we counsel people one-on-one. We have a restorative practices program that we do mostly with schools, but also with some other agencies to kind of help. One person just getting in trouble and a slap on the wrist doesn't often help somebody who's experienced the violence feel safe and whole again. The restorative practices puts people in the same room who've done the hurting, who've been hurt, and the larger community, hopefully, the folks who witnessed it or who were also affected by it, into the same space to try to come up with a solution together and accountability together. We also, through the court program, also we don't just help with restraining orders. If what you need is help with custody or help in other ways navigating the court system, we give free support there. And then the last part of what we try to do is change lives. And that comes in helping people create their new life. Some of the folks who come to our shelter, they don't have anything besides what they're wearing. They bring their kids. Last year, we helped roughly 500 people in our shelter. That's men, women, children in different capacities. And it takes a lot of work when you've left everything you have to get back on your feet. So we have transitional shelter. We help folks get apartments in the community. And we do, let me check my cheat sheet for a second,
Sure.
I'm sorry. And we also have a career center where we really help people kind of be on their own and be independent. Oftentimes when they're in violent relationships, you feel trapped and you feel dependent, and some partners don't let you work. And so our career center is to really help people start from scratch. Some folks who haven't worked in years or never worked,
Right.
we kind of help them get those skills. And we also have a donation center where we take clothes and
Right.
household goods and things for kids and babies and diapers, anything somebody would need, as well as support groups in both Norwich and New London. I feel like it's important to go through our services.
Exactly.
I know it's a list, but I want people to know what we do. And everything we
Right.
do is free. We're a private nonprofit. We don't work for the police or the state of Connecticut. We get some state funding, but everything is always private and confidential and safe. We do take donations as well for our, whether it's clothing and goods for our donations room, but also money donations. We've been very lucky to have lots of support in the community, but we need more because it is the donations people give. They're very inspiring. I work every Monday in our counseling department, and there's a number of people who just come randomly and will give us
that's
$300.
Yeah.
And we'll give money and just say, hey, I'm doing this because I know there's people who have less
Right,
than me.
and people have to realize that sometimes state and federal funding, grants don't come through, and you need private donations. And we had a very successful walk in October where we raised a lot of money for
Yes.
Safe Futures so it could continue its programs. And there are many people who volunteer. And there are many people in the community, and that's where we're getting to
Yes.
honoring men. So there are guys like you and 17 others who we're going to honor at a special luncheon because we realize the attention has been on all the women's issues, but men are needed to join in that fight, and you represent one of the best of those. I want to read off the names of all the men that we're going to honor at the luncheon. The luncheon is going to be on Friday afternoon on April 27th at the Norwich Holiday Inn, and we're going to honor, and many of you may know these people in the community, Brian Bartelli, Kevin Barney, Chief Patrick Daly from the Norwich Police Department, because the police, the people in the courts play an important role in carrying through the things that need to be done. James Epps from Dominion Energy, Dr. Michael Grainer, Superintendent of the Groton Public Schools, Ignacio Heredia, Planned Parenthood of New London, Dr. William Horgan from Bacchus Hospital, Frederick Douglass Knowles, Associate Professor at Three Rivers Community College, Chief Brett Mahoney from the Waterford Police Department, Chief Jeffrey Nixon from Groton Long Point and Safe Futures, Roger Parkman from the Safe Futures Board, Juan Roman, New London Athletics, Sergeant Richard Sawyer from the Groton Town Police, Patrick, I mentioned you, Pastor Sam Spatafore from the Thames River Church in New London, Chief Darren Stewart from the Stonington Police Department, and we have one, because of his tragic death, he's now on our screen, William Wernow, and we're going to honor him in memoriam for all of his volunteer contributions to Safe Futures and to the community fighting domestic violence over the years. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Mr. Wernow?
Yeah, I'm going to reference him as Bill. Bill was an incredibly dedicated man to many causes, but to Safe Futures in particular was something that really was very important to him. He did a lot of volunteer hours with us. He was a retired from Pfizer, and his wife, Ann, worked at Safe Futures. She started our prevention program. She got us, helped to design the program and get into schools in the area. And Bill saw his ability as a man to support the work as just integral and is key. And also to bring people in. Bill is really one of the big reasons why I work at Safe Futures now.
Oh, wonderful.
And so, yeah, he would go to schools for us. One of the first events I did with him, we went to SCAD. We went to their, which is a drug recovery and alcohol dependency recovery organization in southeastern Connecticut. We went to their residential facility in Lebanon and spoke to 80 men about this. Bill saw the need not just to tell men, don't hit women. He saw that men have been told that for decades, if not centuries, in in a personal way at home, don't hit girls, but that hasn't equaled an end to domestic violence.
Right.
It needs to be more. And Bill spoke about it more. He talked about respect. What does respect really mean in a relationship? It means listening to your partner. It means holding women up. It means acknowledging the hurt and damage that's been done by it.
And he was also the first to inaugurate, which we have to bring up, the I Choose campaign, which is going to be part of our luncheon. Tell us what that's about.
Yeah. The I Choose program has been started by the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and it's a statewide campaign, and it's really a social media campaign. The goal of the I Choose program is to get more men to stand up and say, I am against domestic violence. I choose something else. All right? And I'm going to hold up a piece of paper that is one of the models for this kind of what it looks like. And it's a piece of paper that just says, I choose. And they ask men to fill in what would go in. You can say, I choose respect. I choose listening. I choose to believe. Because as we've seen with the Me Too campaign, a big problem is that we don't believe women who say they've experienced sexual violence, sexual harassment, domestic violence.
So all of our guys at our luncheon are going to make their own I Choose statements. We're going to take a photo with them, and that will be part of it. So the I Choose campaign is very important. And men have to stand up and say what they choose. It's very critical.
They have to say it, and then they have to do it.
And they have to do it. And also, you've got a film, so I just want you to, that we're going to show a piece of. Tell us a little bit about that film in the time we have left.
This is a film called The Mask You Live In, and it's a beautiful film about what the messages we give men are in this country. What is American masculinity?
Right.
When we say, be a man, man up, what are we saying? And this film does a beautiful job acknowledging how that hurts men and how it hurts our society, how it encourages violence against women. They cover so many areas in our country. One of the main people in the movie is actually a former pro football player and coach, Erdman. I believe it's Joel Erdman, who played for the Baltimore Colts. And talking about what it means to be a leader of boys, right? As a coach, he has coached so many young men, and he saw that at a very early age that he had influence beyond just how to run a certain route.
Right.
That he had the influence to let boys know it's okay to cry. To have a big 200-pound linebacker stand on a football field and play a violin for the crowd, because he's not just a brutal football player. He is an artist and sees the kind of fullness of men. And so the movie, it does that in so many ways.
And you've been
It's
showing that
first
movie
step.
to various groups, students, young men, everywhere. And we're going to show a little piece of that movie at the luncheon.
Yes.
We're also going to have some male entertainment too, because everything's going to be for the guys. So we have to thank them all. We're going to. What else?
Yeah. Well, I want to acknowledge you, Sheila, and the Power of Purple for purchasing this movie for Safe
That's
Futures.
right.
We have played this movie for over 600 people.
We're very happy that you did that.
And you made it possible. The Power of Purple made it possible. We do have good funds at Safe Futures for many things, but we never want the prevention work and the men's work to take away from the support of survivors and victims.
Yes, and the Power of Purple is something that I'm so proud to be a part of, that was created by my Rose Conrad Memorial Fund of Safe Futures in memory of a client of mine who was murdered by her husband, together with Hadassah of Eastern Connecticut. By creating this awareness campaign, we brought two organizations together, more woman power, manpower to work on these issues, to bring awareness and education that's so needed. You're doing such a fantastic job. I'm looking forward to the luncheon. Give us a final summary of what message we need to get out.
Yeah. We need to get out the responsibility each of us have. Every man who's watching this needs to model, right? Model listening, model emotions, show them, work through it. I know we've been told, I was told at a young age to stop crying, and I have to work through it every day today. Model it in your relationships. If you need leadership, we can come to our luncheon in April, but go on YouTube. There are so many powerful videos by men's groups. A Call to Men, Jackson Katz, there are so many spaces to learn about what a healthy masculinity, what a healthy manhood is in this country. So men, we need to acknowledge that it's a problem, that violence and masculinity, that what it means to be a man means to be violent is a problem. We need to acknowledge it, and then we need to counteract it within ourselves, examine those messages we have had, and practice something different, and then listen, believe women. We need to believe them, we need to support them, and we can't just say, oh yeah, I'm a good guy. It's really easy to say, oh, I'm one of the good ones. We need to act it out.
Right.
We need to act it out.
Okay, great. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for listening. Please join us at our luncheon at the Holiday Inn in Norwich on Friday, April 27th. We will honor people like Patrick included, and a group of others, and Mr. Wernow in memoriam. Thank you. See you next week on takeback.org. Good night.